Welcome everyone to this session, and good afternoon to everyone. On behalf of the Women in Digital Forum, I would like to thank you all for joining us today. Today's session aims to move a little bit beyond a conversation that we've had plenty of times already about AI adoption or digital skills, but it goes into a more, I would say, deeper kind of question, right? So how work itself is changing as AI, automation, and agentic systems are becoming more and more embedded in how organizations are actually operating now these days. Our speaker, Cassandra Gardiner, she will introduce the concept of human automation as well. And she will present this framework for thinking not just about what AI can actually do, but also what must remain human and who stays accountable, and how leaders, workers alike are prepared for this complete shift that we're living. We also will touch on emerging questions around workforce rights, digital leadership, and also accountability, and all these areas where the Women in Digital Forum work have an actual real opportunity to lead and to actually propose specific policy recommendations and actions and best practices to be uptaken by different stakeholders. With no more delay, I'll now hand over to you, Cassandra, so that you can start with your presentation. Thank you very much again for being here, and I look forward to the discussion that might arise from this webinar. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Ruben, and thanks for everyone attending. And I hope we do get into a discussion, because I really do want to hear everyone's thoughts. It'd be really useful. So if I can get the first slide, Ruben, that would be fantastic.
Is this one?
No,
we don't see your screen, Ruben.
Oh, sorry. I thought that was sharing it the screen already. Okay, is it now? Yeah, perfect.
Yeah, so the question I want to explore is what happens when artificial intelligence no longer simply supports work, but becomes part of how work is organised. So this is not just another wave of software. AI is beginning to influence decisions, workflows, professional judgment, and accountability. Historically, we treated these issues separately. Technology sat with IT, employment sat with HR, policy sat with government, education prepared people for defined professions, leadership managed hierarchies. But AI does not respect those boundaries. Technology now shapes employment, policy shapes digital design, workers need to understand governance, leaders need to understand algorithms, and human rights become part of technology design. I use the term human automation to describe this emerging relationship. Care will be my recurring example, because it sits at the centre of many of Europe's biggest challenges: ageing, workforce shortages, women's employment, public services, human rights, and professional judgment. But the principles apply far beyond care to healthcare, education, justice, employment, and leadership and public administration. The central question is simple. As artificial intelligence becomes more capable, how do we ensure humans become more capable too, not less? That, for me, is the challenge of human automation. Next slide, please, Ruben. So before we talk about AI, we need to start with data. Data is not intelligence. It is a record of something, a measurement, a transaction, a location, timestamp, image, message, decision, or pattern waiting to be interpreted. Once data is digitized, it can be stored, linked, and combined. Databases connect, systems exchange information, organizations bring together service data, workforce data, customer data, and operational data. At that point, the question changes. It is no longer simply what information do we have? It becomes what can this information tell us? That is where algorithms come in. An algorithm is a set of rules used to solve a problem. Modern AI uses algorithms at enormous scale, but it does not think in the human sense. It calculates probability. Large language models like this take this further. They are trained on vast amounts of human created material, learn statistical relationship between words, ideas, and concepts. So AI does not understand reality directly. It builds models of reality, models of language, models of behavior, models of organization, and increasingly models of human work. Once work can be observed, digitized, connected, analyzed, and modeled, it can also be redesigned. This is where this becomes human automation. The question is no longer only how we use AI. The question becomes who governs the models that are beginning to shape work. Next slide, please, Ruben. This slide introduces what I call the digital fabric. The European Commission's Gen AI for EU framing makes clear that AI is not a single sector technology. It is being applied across health, public services, cybersecurity, mobility, climate, manufacturing, science, digital twins, and virtual worlds. So AI is becoming a transformation layer across society and the economy. The digital fabric model explains what this means inside organisations. At the centre is the real world organisation. Its services, workforce, community, infrastructure and people. Around that sits digital fabric, the intelligent layer that senses, connects, analyses, models and increasingly orchestrates activity. It begins with data from systems, records, transactions, documents and interactions. This data is connected through cloud, networks, APIs and identity. It becomes knowledge through metadata, graphs, memory and models. It then begins to predict, recommend and act through AI, digital twins, automation and agentic systems. The key shift is this. The digital fabric no longer simply observes the organisation. It starts to participate in it. It influences workflows, decisions, priorities, risk allocation and accountability. That is why human automation becomes necessary. If AI is becoming the fabric around organisations, human agency cannot be an afterthought. In care, healthcare, public services and leadership, we still need empathy, judgement, consent, fairness, ethics and accountability. The digital fabric model shows the technological architecture. Human automation provides the human architecture. AI may become the fabric around society, but humans must remain the moral, professional and accountable centre. Next slide, please. When we talk about AI, most conversations focus on capability. Can it be faster, more accurate, more productive, less costly? But in care and in many public services, there is a more important question. Does AI care? Not emotionally, institutionally, professionally, socially. AI is now entering decisions that affect people's lives. It can help prioritise referrals, support clinical decisions, assist recruitment, monitor performance, determine eligibility, allocate work and generate recommendations. But when something goes wrong, accountability returns to people. Who made the decision? Who approved the system? Who accepted the recommendation? Who should have intervened? This is why human oversight matters, but meaningful oversight cannot simply mean a human clicking approve at the end of an automated process. If a social worker is carrying unmanageable caseloads, or a clinician is under extreme pressure, or a manager has only received basic AI awareness training, can we honestly call that meaningful human oversight? That is where human automation begins. The question is whether organisations have created the conditions for humans to work responsibly alongside AI. And that is not only a technology challenge, it is a workforce challenge, a governance challenge, a leadership challenge, and a human challenge. This matters particularly in care. Across Europe, long-term care work is predominantly carried out by women, while ICT remains predominantly male. AI systems may therefore be designed in one professional culture and deployed in another. Next slide, please. So far, we've looked at why AI matters, how data becomes models, and how AI is beginning to shape decisions, services, and work. This brings us to the central concept of the presentation, human automation. I define human automation as the governance, design, and development of human capability alongside increasingly autonomous digital systems. It is not a definition of artificial intelligence. It is a definition of the relationship between people and AI. Because automation no longer changes only tasks, it changes decisions, accountability, professional identity, organisational design, and what people need to know, challenge, and protect at work. Human automation asks 4 basic questions. What should be automated? What must remain human? Who remains accountable? And how do we prepare people to work alongside human automation? Next slide. So this slide takes us to the European AI Act. The AI Act is important because it does not regulate AI only by technical capability. It regulates AI according to its potential impact on people. This is a major strength. As AI moves into healthcare, education, employment, justice, migration, and essential public services, it becomes high risk because it can affect rights, safety, access, opportunity, and life outcomes. So the higher the human consequence, the greater the need for governance, transparency, accountability, data quality, and human oversight. This is where human automation adds something important. The AI Act asks how risky is this AI system? Human automation asks, what does this mean for the human working alongside it? That shifts the lens. It is not enough to say high-risk AI requires human oversight. We have to ask what meaningful oversight actually requires. It means people need enough understanding, authority, and confidence to interpret recommendations, recognise limitations, challenge outputs, understand data quality, exercise judgment, and intervene when necessary. Oversight is not only a legal requirement, it is a professional capability. Next slide. This is where actor network theory is useful. It helps us see that decisions are no longer made by one person, one manager, or one system. They emerge from a network. People, policies, data, software, suppliers, algorithms, dashboards, regulation, and organisational targets. This matters because AI can appear objective. A dashboard gives a score, a system gives a recommendation, a risk rating appears on screen. But underneath that output are many hidden choices. What data was used, what was excluded, what the model prioritised, what the organisation measured, and what the worker was expected to do with the result. Actor network theory calls this black boxing. The complexity disappears, the output begins to look like a fact. That changes power. Power no longer sits with the manager. It also sits with those who design the system, own the data, define the metrics, write the policies, and interpret the outputs. For workers, this has real consequences. Professional judgment can be displaced by system recommendations, expertise can move into technology, measurement can move and become surveillance. And this is why human automation is a governance challenge. If agency is distributed across the network, accountability, rights, and protections must be designed across the network too. The principle is simple. We should not design networks that optimize people around machines. We should design human-centered networks where technology amplifies human judgment, professional expertise, and care. Next slide, please. This brings us to workforce capability. If AI is becoming part of every profession, vocational education cannot focus only on technical skills. People will need to work alongside AI, exercise judgment, challenge recommendations, and remain accountable for outcomes. This is why I developed the VET Human Stewardship Pyramid. The pyramid shows a progression. We begin with the human capabilities that AI cannot replace: judgment, communication, experience, and ethical reasoning. From there, capability develops through understanding AI, collaborating with it, knowing when to challenge it, and having the confidence to act when something is wrong. At the top is stewardship. This is a shift I believe vocational education now needs to make. We are no longer preparing people to simply use technology. We are preparing them to govern the relationship between the technology and people. The first generation of digital transformation taught people how to use digital tools. The next generation must prepare them to steward AI responsibly. Next slide. So AI is presented as a technology program. In reality, it's an organisational transformation program affecting governance, accountability, risk and workforce capability. One insight from the UK government-funded digital leadership pilot I helped lead through the LGA was that senior leaders were not asking for more technical training. They were asking who is accountable. They wanted practical governance, assurance and decision-making frameworks to help them lead technologies that sit outside their own professional expertise. At the same time, professionals across health, care and public services are increasingly expected to become digital experts alongside their primary profession. That risks diminishing digital as something everyone can do, while overlooking the depth of expertise required in governance, legislation, cybersecurity, data, AI assurance and systems architecture. As AI evolves from automation to increasingly autonomous systems, those questions become even more important. Next slide. So we're getting close to the end, shorter slides. So by 2030, almost 1 in 4 people in the EU will be aged 65 or over. Care is high economic value, not simply a public cost. Power and commercial value increase as we move up the pyramid. Female representation falls as power increases. Those closest to care have the least influence over the technological design. Human automation asks, how do we keep professional judgment and the female voice in the loop? And the final slide, please. So I want to finish with what is probably the most provocative question in this presentation. AI does not create knowledge from nothing. It extracts, restructures, recombines, and predicts from information that already exists. Much of the information begins with us. Our work, our writing, our decisions, our professional judgment, our experience. As we work, we leave digital traces, documents, records, case notes, emails, and interactions with digital systems. Those traces can be analysed, modelled and used to train AI systems that continue generating recommendation products and services. I realise this is controversial, but it raises an important question. When our knowledge becomes part of an AI system, what exactly has been transferred? Is it simply data, or is it accumulated professional knowledge? If it is knowledge, who owns it? Who controls its future use? Should it continue creating value after someone leaves an organisation? And should workers have rights when their expertise becomes part of an AI system? We already see these debates in the creative industries. I believe they are now coming to every profession. And this is why human automation is not simply about adopting technology. It is about governance, professional identity, and workforce rights. The European AI Act provides an essential foundation for trustworthy AI. But I believe the next conversation is about protecting the human knowledge on which AI depends. So I'll leave you with one final question. As machines become more intelligent, will our institutions evolve quickly enough to protect the humans whose knowledge makes that intelligence possible? Thank you. So hopefully I didn't fly through too quickly and people were able to keep up with some of the themes and areas I'm covering, which I realise it is a very sort of collective from different, what we typically silo areas of professionalism and expertise. But I think if you really start peeling away what sits underneath AI and the digital sector, it really does entertain a few more questions than we are at the moment allowed to ask, I think, sometimes. So, Ruben, I don't know if you want to facilitate and hopefully get a discussion going from everybody, but I hope the presentation was useful.
Indeed, thank you very much, Cassandra, for your presentation and for opening up now this moment for the debate and for asking questions. So, of course, now we're going to open the Q&A moment of this webinar, and you are all encouraged to share your questions, your comments, feedback. Right now, I see Joyce's hand, so please, the floor is yours. You're muted, Joyce.
Yeah, sorry about that. No, thanks, Ruben, and thanks so much, Cass. Excellent presentation. And as you say, it covers a kind of a range of, I don't know if the word is expectations or pathways where, AI is being used. But I particularly, I'd like to ask you, the concept of stewardship. That's really, I think that's nearly central, actually, to all of this. And particularly on our working group, that idea, what are we, it's not training for or developing for, but could you just explore that idea of stewardship again? Because I think that's a really interesting concept. And number one, and number two, how can we develop, I use the word interventions as distinct from programs, array of interventions that could make that happen?
Yeah, so it is a central theme about stewardship, because I don't think at the moment, I did a load of analysis after I ran the LGA. We were funded by, the programme was funded by the UK government to take a specific number of professional leaders from across the UK local authorities. And the point was to give them a deep dive in digital training. And the questions that came up out of that work was very much what led me to the concept of stewardship. They are professionals in their own right, whether it's care, whether it's planning, whether it's politics or whatever. They have a central profession. They were expected in 3 deep dive sessions to understand the concepts of data, AI, and digital technology. And we took the feedback from it, and it was quite clear that they don't want to know what a scrum is. They don't care about Kanbans. What they're looking for is much broader frameworks and who becomes accountable. And I think the AI Act is spelling that out. It is saying there is accountability here when you get into these professions where we're looking at things like care or healthcare. But in organisations, what we see now is a complete diffusion of who is responsible. And this is where policies and legislation is lagging. Now, I don't know if that's particularly designed like that the workforce doesn't have a position. But for me, the position is, what right does the professional worker have? If the AI system is wrong, and anybody, and I'm assuming all of you are using AI around this meeting, it is repeatedly wrong. And people need to know that they should be able to challenge that, and the organisation needs to support them in that challenge, because the AI policy is pointing out the legislation is somebody is accountable here. And often what I see is it quite often comes down to the lowest common denominator, and they're often the most least experienced person in what they're being, may I use the word, accused of doing, because they've done what they thought they were expected to do, but the training doesn't necessarily put them in a space where they're able to analytically understand what the analysis tells them. And if you go into, and I studied mathematics at Southampton University, if you go into the maths behind these models, it is incredibly complex. You're talking about probability, which is a Victorian Edwardian thing about gambling. That is what probability is based on mathematically. It's a high-level mathematical concept. And the stewardship idea is telling us and the reason I've linked it to the program with Ruben and Vet is in every profession, if you're going to be using a profession, you should have some serious training on AI and digital technology. You should be allowed to challenge it. I think there should be, I mean, in the UK, we have the IOC, the Independent Commission for Data on GDPR. They cannot cope with the complexities around data. And yet an individual worker is expected to understand what the analytical results of AI and digital technology is showing them. And they have no training in that. They'll have training in nursing, they'll have training in probably looking at the types of systems, but what they further need is the stewardship to challenge the system, because what needs to happen is this needs to go back into the private sector, and the public sector needs to have visibility of this. It needs to understand where the machine is going wrong. Because if we allow these biases to continue, we will get into a very dangerous and skewed place. I mean, AWS has just removed its recruitment system because the agentic system decided that females were lesser than males. And so they started excluding female CVs and applications. And that system had decided that on its own. And that's what agentic systems start to do, because they start to create their own thinking and theory inside of the system, that black boxing. And there are things like white boxing now, where we should be able to translate the information as to what the system has done. But the stewardship is about, people need to know in the 21st century, you are not going to be separate from AI or digital technology. You are surrounded by it. And as a professional, you should have the right and the support of your organisation to flag and push back on things like this data is not accurate. And I think that should be transparent to government so that they understand when the private sector is addressing these issues, because we're increasingly governed by private sector technology. So I work with Big Care Systems. They're one of the top 3 core systems in the UK that all of our adult social care and children's and families send. All the information is held in 2 systems, Mosaic and Liquid Logic. Liquid Logic has a feedback forum and you can submit your questions, but nobody knows what happens to those issues because they look at it through a commercial lens. Will this make money? If it's commercially viable, then we will build that into the system. There's all sorts of risks around safeguarding, around gangs, domestic abuse we use the system for. There needs to be greater transparency, and the only way we can do that is through stewarding the people who use the system day in, day out, to have the right to feedback and inform on what the system is doing and where it's going wrong. Is that okay, Joyce?
Yeah, no, excellent. Ruben, can I just follow up? No, I think it is, because it's quite complex, really, what you're saying. So, and I think it's an excellent concept. And if I could just ask, how are we going to develop interventions? Or is it just a concept, or is it the training? You're saying everybody has to be trained, but it's a little bit more than that, isn't it? The accountability. And I suppose that's the first question. The second one, if you look at the AI Act, it's based on this risk, low risk, high risk, whatever. And I think I absolutely agree. I don't think they realize, high risk, and it's really around companies rather than professional services and various other things. But looking at governance then, what role does governance have this? So if we take education or care or any of these other ones, governors or governing bodies, they've a responsibility. Schools have a responsibility. Like down at schools, primary schools, how is that? So that's about the governance. It doesn't really address the issue that you've raised, which about stewardship, in the sense that, what do they know, but are they in place, and how are we going to ensure that this is happening? Because things are moving so fast with the technology, but not with our structures and accountability.
Yeah, that's right. So first of all, you need the training. So any professional should have some sort of training on AI and digital systems, and that should be built into their coursework. It's not a bolt-on, it's not optional. They need to understand the type of technology they're dealing with. Secondly, organisations need to have some sort of accountable bidding. They have to have governance in their policy, but also they need to have some mechanism, and this is where the policymakers in the EU need to think about this, is what bodies start to oversee this area, because it needs to be transparent. It can't be just going, at the moment, the way it happens is a worker sees something's wrong, they feed it back to the private organisation. That's it. We don't see what the issue is. We don't get the information back from the private developer, what they're going to do about it. And government doesn't get to see the issues until something major becomes an issue or is exposed. Like AWS, obviously their own quality assurance picked up that there was a fault in their recruitment system. So we need whether it's a role or a repository that organisations or workers can feed into, and this is slightly on the edge of whistleblowing, and they should be protected against this, that if they see something that's wrong, they can feed it into a place, a repository where the public sector can view it, and they can also see what the private sector is doing to address it. It needs to be a feedback loop, so that the AI or the bias or whatever is being addressed and the system is taking it out. And I know that's a long process, but that's typically how these sort of governance matters work. But the worker needs to know that they have a right to challenge the system, that the system, the AI system, is not 100% right. And that's where we're at the moment, is people are tipping into believing the AI system or the output is correct. And if they're not trained to sort of maintain professional judgment and query, and it could be nuanced, but the problem with nuance is if you've got 1% of 50,000 people, that can have a huge impact. And this is where we get into the numbers again around that. If it's 1% of 30, it might not matter. But if it's 5,000 or more, where that deviation, the standard deviation, is incredibly large on the impact it can have, and particularly public sector, where these services are impacting livelihoods. They're not just about sort of, you know, they are where people are very dependent on the public sector to support them and to rectify issues around them. So that there needs to be greater transparency, and the best way, and also for cybersecurity is a massive threat now. I mean, the UK is on constant red alert around cybersecurity, and you have to start with the employee. You know, most cybersecurity is with the employee. Once you get beyond the firewalls and all the technical stuff, your first point is your employee. And if you can create a workforce that is vigilant, and not just on the AI going wrong, but also on the security of the systems, you also protect the system. So it serves many purposes.
No, thanks. And sorry, Sue, for
That's okay.
stuff.
I was going to say it was probably a related question, so it's no problem.
Thanks.
Thanks, Cass. That was really fascinating. Your knowledge is impressive. So, you know, and I loved the presentation. I'm glad you've mentioned the workers, because, as you know, I'm a professor of employment studies and human resource management. So I just wanted to shift the debate a little bit towards employment and the workforce. So I've got a couple of questions, a couple of comments. So shall I just roll them all out, and then, you know, it's up to you how you want to address them.
Yeah.
My first point is about context. So when I mean this is big stuff that you're presenting, but contextualizing it, you know, into the labour market's very complex. So when we talk about workers, who are we actually talking about? You know, you have talked about care workers, knowledge workers, so you've gone across the spectrum. But I think, you know, what's human automation is going to affect different sectors and jobs and industries differently. But, you know, I don't think you would disagree with that. And I also see it as the de-skilling of work. So Harry Braverman in the 70s talked about the de-skilling of clerical work through computers, the automation of that type of work. And I just keep thinking, oh, you know, he did that in the 70s and we're still really talking about it now, but also about how that's gendered. So care work is a highly gendered form of work. It's basically seen as a de-skilled, you know, a low-skilled environment, and it's, you know, dominated by women. So changes, you know, human automation in care work is going to be very different to human automation in knowledge work. So I think, you know, we need to think about those sorts of debates. And workers' rights, you know, I haven't heard trade unions mentioned, but, you know, I think they will have an increasing role to play. And I don't know if you've come across anything on the trade union view on, I'm sure they'll have quite a lot to say about human automation, because it is going to, you know, put jobs at risk, and also end up de-skilling. Okay, so who's shaping the human automation? But I think you've already touched upon that anyway. And, you know, as you know, I work in higher education, so talking about context, I don't think we can keep up with AI, and our students are certainly using it inappropriately. So, you know, it's somebody like me who doesn't do much teaching but supervises, you know, I have to spend more time checking that the work actually is the student's work, rather than, you know, we can all use AI to look things up. I did that myself with something I was looking at this morning, but then I go to the source and I read it. A lot of students don't do that. And just a couple of other thoughts about, so actor network theory, the debate there is about, do machines have agency? And I think that's, I think you said they don't, but they're developing these capabilities through learning. Every time we put something in ChatGPT, that, you know, that builds up its knowledge base of that. So I personally don't put my work into ChatGPT, and we use Copilot at the university, which is safer. And the final point really is, and it's all to do with the workforce again, you said who owns the knowledge, and we have to think about different types of knowledge as well, things like tacit knowledge. So you can't really own somebody's tacit knowledge technically, and yeah, so that would be another sort of something to think about. But I think my main point is who's being left behind, who's being de-skilled, and I think you'll find it's women much more than men. So they're my points. Thank you.
Thanks, Sue. I really appreciate a lot of points. I've made some notes, so hopefully I can cover some, but I think quite a few of your points link up as well. You know, the de-skilling and tacit knowledge. And I mean, what's fortunate is systems, although they're trying to develop tacit knowledge and empathy and these other skills, they are typically and predominantly human skills, and they should be regarded as that. And I think, as much as they might try to replicate, that is one thing maybe they will get very good at, but equally it goes back to that whole point of stewarding, is the human must be able to challenge and understand, because a lot of these systems are designed to draw us in. There's a BBC article that I've just seen come up on one of my feeds, where a chap in, I think he's Northern Ireland, has been led into almost arming himself because his chatbot told him it was developing sort of emotions for him, and he was about to be attacked, and he got completely drawn into this. And I don't think this case is going to be unique. I mean, there was the Channel 4 programme with the artist on it, who does the pots, who was the Turner Prize winner. There's a lot around these areas that, of course, the technology people want to develop, but you know, that I suppose there are a couple of points I want to make before I get into your points. But what we're giving away here is all going into profits for technical companies, and we're losing control over that governance and that ownership of the worker and our knowledge, and it's not going to go away. And that's why I think policies and governments need to intervene. They need to, the AI Act goes a really good way in saying somebody's accountable here. And when we get up the pillar, that accountability is going to have to stick. But I think that you've got ChatGPT, you've got Grok, you've got Copilot, you've got multiple systems, the shadow AI that people are using, even in the workplace, not necessarily legislated or agreed with their organisation. This is what goes back to the point about stewardship, is your point, Sue. Like, if you're like you go back and look at the source of where did the information come from? Does that paper exist? Does the legislation exist? And if people aren't trained to do that or expected to do that, there's a lot of people who won't do it. They just think, oh yeah, it's generated. And that's where we need to, the stewardship point is this source even real? I mean, legal cases have come up with supposed legal cases that have never even happened. And so it does mean that people need to comprehend. And they're never going to get into the mathematics or the technical capabilities of these systems, but they need to be given agency. And your point on machines, yes, machines do have agency because the agentic AIs are starting to create their own systems. They, a lot of systems work with reductionism and then they re-evaluate and they come up with different. I studied Santa Fe complexity theory and chaos theory when I was at university. Complexity theory tells you that things will emerge. It's like Darwinism, things will emerge and they're emerging inside. And that's why I'm saying that this stewardship requires transparency at the policy level, so that those people who govern should be able to see where systems are potentially displacing people, are producing bias, and they should be able to see how the organisations are addressing it. And it shouldn't just be based on commercial value. It needs to be based on clear transparency around what is actually going on with these AI systems. And so they're no longer black boxes. And they talk about white boxes and analysis, but that's really specialised for technical people. I think, I don't know what the trade unions are doing personally. I mean, to be honest, I think they're so busy trying to deal in the UK with our own government, that I don't know whether they've even looked at where AI comes in, even though the UK government is heavily pushing digitising the workforce and AI. And it's not, the UK government isn't as transparent, I think, as its intentions are. They've pulled back on it a bit, but they're still pushing that agenda because I see the information going out around it in the circles I move in. So I think there is a real lack of recognition of where the workers' rights are. And if you are working with an AI system, when something goes wrong, I think this question wasn't in my presentation, where does it go? The question comes right back to the worker. It doesn't go back to the AI system. It doesn't go back to the procurement team. It doesn't go back to Microsoft or whoever's behind it. It comes back to the worker. And that can get you fired. You can lose your role over a system that's generated an answer based on probability. And when we look at probability, that's almost the same as marketing. It says, oh, it's almost 100%, almost. What's that then? Is that beyond 60%? Is that 75%? Is that 90%? Almost is not good enough in what the output. And for me, it's always been about standard deviation. How far off are we when we get a result? And you don't know, because the AI doesn't tell you that. We don't have metrics around it. And even if we did, I don't know what people would do with them anyway.
I think it will just get more and more clever, undoubtedly. But I think the biggest thing we have is our tacit knowledge. So I think that's something we can really hold back, so to speak. But tacit knowledge is difficult to tap into. Yeah. Thank you, Cass.
Well, thanks, Sue, for your thoughts.
So now I have a question, and then I see Simona also wants to ask something. So my question, it's related to the workforce evolution. So it's been already a little bit commented, right? But your study actually cited that around 30% of hours worked could be actually automated by 2030 in the US and the European Union. So from your experience and your point of view, how do you see this actually translating for the workers who actually remain? So are we heading now towards a workforce reduction, or towards the same number of workers, but that actually are absorbing higher workloads and higher expectations, essentially because of this automation? And also connected to this, do you see this trend strengthening worker protections, or do you see quite the opposite, that these trends are kind of eroding workers' rights and will contribute to erode their workers' rights in the near future?
Yeah, so I'll give you real examples, Ruben. I had 9 robots I introduced at Redbridge. They're RPAs, they're UiPath, they're specific units that take away the human work. And those works were mostly in ledgers. So they were for people who were receiving benefits, basically. If you're a SEND child, you might be receiving a sum of money. And normally that would have been going through a worker. They'd be looking at the information, making sure the payment was paid, and they'd be monitoring, forecasting, and this links back actually to care. The reason I was looking specifically at care is because we're at a tipping point now where when you get beyond 65 and you go to 80, care increases hugely on costs. And a lot of that work is being automated. The triaging, we were looking at how we triage people coming into the care system. So how do we automate that process? Currently, it uses 15 forms, and the government is trying to get to a universal form. Now, I kind of just ignored it personally because I thought I'm not going to, but my first role was e-commerce, and I did set up mortgage applications, so I know how you can reduce the process. But yes, the program I was working was called MTFS, which is medium-term financial savings, and our aim is to reduce the workers. So those RPAs were reducing workers. They were taking workers out of the workforce who would have done that ledger job. And admittedly, there's value there because it is more it's quite mind-numbing. It's it's often like manual work it's repetitive, so mistakes can be made. It's not particularly interesting. So there is a case to be made on the RPAs. But the objective was to reduce the overheads, which is your personnel count. The question is, when we step up on that AI ACT model, when you start getting up into safeguarding and aspects like that, the system is now going to start triaging information and data, and it's the person sat in front of that screen who then gets. So let's take things like a child in care. So the systems, the technology we use in Mosaic gives us an overview of all the touch points around that child, the grandparents, the parents, the schools. And we use those systems not only to monitor the child and the conditions of the child's education. There's a system called MASH where the police are putting in data, social services, GPs, all sorts of people are informing that system around that child. And we have a lens that we're looking at the child. We have things like county gang lines. Is the child getting involved in county gang lines? Now, if the data isn't collected correctly, or if human oversight becomes reduced to sitting in front of a screen. So, for instance, when the social worker goes into somebody's property, is the property dirty? Is the child clean? All those things that you visually see, if we reduce the worker to somebody sitting at an AI screen that says no risk here because you can't smell the damp in the property because an AI system can't pick up damp, it can't see that the child's dirty, you're missing. And that's exactly where the AI Act starts to come in. And that is where the worker becomes the penalty. If they fail to pick up because baby P was murdered by its parents because they didn't go and do their check on that baby, they're the one who becomes accountable. And this is where this is where, particularly at the moment in the UK, there's huge pressure on our systems where we haven't got the finances to keep supporting the public sector that we've grown. And they're looking constantly at reducing costs. And the straightforward cost is always overheads. It's always personnel. We do time and motion studies on how long does it take you to process that form. So if we take your visibility away from that form, we can process it in 2 minutes versus you taking 45 minutes. And in some cases, that is really useful. I'm not saying that AI doesn't provide benefits, but the point is the worker, the professional, still needs to make a professional judgment. And that links back to Sue's point about tacit knowledge of, are there markers that we've seen before where something gives me an instinct that this child is at risk? And it's the worker who can sense something, and it might not be there in the data, and they have to be able to act on what the data might not be telling them. And that's my point about stewardship, about they must understand that data can be wrong. It is not finite. It is dependent on what's been admitted to the system. And equally, it can be really useful in helping them prioritise cases as well. But there needs to be a balance between what I'm prioritising and what I'm letting go. And am I okay to let those go and prioritise that particular work? And as for protections, yes, I completely think it's eroding workers' protections, because you will still be accountable, even though it's somebody at Microsoft or somebody at Anthropic who created a system that told you that's fine, everything looks good here, and you listen to the system and fail to sort of think, actually, I've seen signs like this before where it's led to this. And you have to have the backing of your organisation. So when you go to your manager or your team manager and say, something's not right here, the data's telling me this, but my gut feeling is I need to do this. The organisation needs to back you and say, yeah. And at the moment, particularly in the UK, it's moving much more towards digitisation and AI, where they're assuming workers can be replaced by AI systems and we can reduce the overheads. The other thing is, if you do anything like this, what we call the total operating model, the total costs, most organisations don't know what the cost of data will be in 3 years' time. The fact that that there's now a movement against data centres means that your overheads of your model in year 1 are probably going to ramp up 30% in year 3 and possibly even more. So yeah, you've got rid of a worker, but your overheads on your data costs are possibly going to increase if we haven't got enough data storage. So there's lots of factors that come into play around this, and it is a big area, and I think it is problematic for policymakers to get their heads around. But workers definitely need rights around this, because you might find yourself in a couple of years' time sharing your job with an automated system, and the system is telling you what to do, and you've lost agency, you've lost your decision power, you've been, like the point Sue's made, you've been de-skilled, because the system now has created the skill set and the processes, and you become part of, which is my point about human automation, the system starts to tell you, okay, today you're going to do this, this and this. Mm-hmm. And yet you're still the one who's responsible, not the system.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Thank you very much, Cassandra, for the explanation. I think it's a very interesting topic. Unfortunately, we are running out of time. So I will give the floor to Simona, and I will ask you if you can be brief in your response, and then we can close this session, and that would be it. So Simona, please, the floor is all yours.
So hello, it's not exactly a question, it's more like my opinion, giving a little bit optimism to what you were talking, because I'm talking more from computer science perspective, because what we saw several years ago, it's more like Wild West. Everyone is doing whatever they think, there is no regulation and so on and so on. But now, even in research, like when we are publishing some paper about AI usage, creating some module with 99.99, now automatically the research already is saying like, no, model is not enough. There should be some explainability. So this is why we are switching to explainable AI, and it step by step, at least in research, becomes like a must, not as like, oh, it's nice to have. But also I would like to highlight, like probably it will be regulated step by step, because we have all those regulations, guidelines, and so on. But this is why also very important is to go to the education, because we struggle with students. They are doing and do not think, what is it? But we already see some nice signs, especially in master's and PhD students, when we are just presenting something and they start asking like, is it ethical? Is it good to do like this? So this is why I assume like, yeah, we still should be following all those regulations, and at the same time make sure we are educating all society levels, not just secondary or higher education, but long life learning and so on. But I believe it will be everything. Okay, we will come back into human-based interactions and job. So we will be more, AI will be more like decision support system, not decision-making system.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think that's right. It needs to be empowering the human, not de-skilling the human. I completely agree, Simona. And I know there's the AI, the CE mark, where you've got to now identify and go through the form of putting down all those questions around what your data is, where you're sourcing it and how the system works. But I think I'm just trying to make people think more about exactly your last point is
I completely agree.
to take that control here.
Last week we were talking, first of all, you need to scare everyone to realize all the threats and risks, then to start talking about what are the possibilities.
Exactly. Thanks, Ruben.
All right. Thank you very much. I think this was the perfect closing actually of the event today. So thank you all of you for joining us today, and also special thank you for our dear speaker Cassandra Gardiner. Of course, if you can maybe drop your email address in the chat for those who might have any questions or would like to follow up at some point later with you, that would be perfect. So if you can share your email, that would be great. And then for the rest, I think that what we can all take away from today is that human automation isn't a distant policy debate. It's actually already shaping how decisions get made, how work gets designed, and who gets to hold power in these new systems. So for our forum, this conversation matters and matters a lot. And the data that we saw today, it's I would say a call to action, not just an observation. So I would encourage you all to keep thinking about the questions that were raised today, particularly around accountability, workers' rights, and where governance needs to catch up with these new emerging and disrupting technologies. And to bring them into your own organizations as well. Thank you once again for your time and for the level of engagement that we had in today's webinar. It was great and very much appreciated. And we'll be sharing the recording and follow-up materials shortly. And as always, the WIT forum remains open for continued discussion. So feel free to share any topic that you would like to present through the Women in Digital forum. You can just share by email the content and a little bit of the description of the session that you would like to present, and we will look into it and try to accommodate the dates. That's it.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.